So this morning's insight is from Louise Timings from Looking Forward Hypnotherapy. So Louise, over to you.
Like I said, I usually do this in about 20 minutes, so I'm going to just speed through. So bear with me, but hopefully you can see the right bit of my screen and not all the notes and bits that go along with it. I'm not very good at presenting. Okie doke. So a few of you before have spoken to me about solution-focused hypnotherapy. So you will know it's nothing like what you see on the films or stage hypnosis. Solution-focused hypnotherapy is a mouthful. So if I stumble over that a few times, that's why. But it's based on science. And we're just going to briefly look at how the brain works so we can understand how hypnosis works too. Okie doke. So like I said, we're going to understand how the brain works, how anxiety, depression, OCD is created, how people suffer in the way that we do, and most importantly, what can we do about it? So we all have one brain and two minds, and I say that every week, but quite often those two brains can be in conflict. So for example, if you've ever tried to be on a diet and you're like, I'm not going to eat the chocolate, you're in your intellectual mind then, you know that that is your goal, and then your primitive mind takes over and you eat the chocolate, and then you go back into the intellectual mind and you're like, why did I eat the chocolate? So that's just like a really easy example of those two brains being in conflict. But the blue bits in this picture are our intellectual mind. So that's our conscious part. It's the part that interacts with the world, the part that's aware and listening to me now, hopefully. But when we operate from that part of the brain, we generally get things right in life. So it will always come up with answers based on a proper assessment of the situation. And generally, it's very positive. So it's attached to a vast intellectual resource as well. So this part of the brain, we don't share with any other animals. And that's why you don't see dogs with mobile phones, monkeys driving cars, etc. It's purely human, that intellectual part of the brain. But there is another part of the brain, I've hinted at it already. This is the original primitive part. And that part of the brain we actually share with a rat. So our limbic system is the same as a rat's. So that's how primitive it is. So the center and influential bit of that brain is the amygdala. This is generally referred to as the fight, flight, or freeze or depression area of the brain, and it's associated with two other very primitive parts. So you've got your hippocampus, which holds all of our primitive and sometimes inappropriate behavioral experiences and patterns. And then you've got your hypothalamus, which regulates all the chemicals in the body and mind. So let's imagine you leave here today, you run into a polar bear. What would happen? I mean, if it was this one, I think you'd be all right. But what would happen? Your anxiety would go up, you'd lose intellectual control, and you'd move from that nice, sensible part of the brain, the intellectual brain, and you'd move into that primitive emotional brain. So you'd go sweaty, your heartbeat would start going, your stomach would churn, and you would be off like a shot before you'd even had a chance to think about it. So in the circumstances, that response would be entirely appropriate, and you'd be really pleased because that's just kept you safe, that's just kept you alive. But unfortunately, it's the same in life. So when our anxiety goes up, and it can be a gradual process, we lose our intellectual control, and to a greater or lesser extent, the primitive mind takes over, and that mind always operates within the primitive parameters of depression, anxiety, or anger. And it can be a combination of all three. So if our primitive brain thinks that for one reason or another, our life is in some sort of crisis or emergency, it's going to step in to help. And depression, anxiety, and anger are all primitive opt-out clauses. Getting out of breath now. So when the caveman looked out the cave and there was snow, ice, or danger, and he couldn't go out to hunt, he basically just pulled the rug over his head and didn't interact until that situation had changed. And we've adapted that to the modern day symptoms of depression. So if we were in the jungle in those days, I doubt very much we'd be too far away from that panic button at any given time because we'd be constantly on high alert looking for that danger. And that's what we've kind of developed into anxiety. And then anger is merely just a primitive way of increasing our strength to defend ourselves against wild animals and other wild tribesmen. And the primitive brain is a negative mind. So it's always going to look at everything from the worst possible perspective. And if you think about it, it has to, because it's there for your self-preservation. So when you run into that polar bear, it's not going to say, oh, it's probably eaten. Like, is that polar bear a dangerous one? Like, it's just going to go, it's going to eat you, get you out of there. And obviously that response is great when you run into a polar bear, but it's not so good when kind of like the bank statement arrives, or you're facing redundancy, or you're just not even having an argument and you just go into that primitive brain. So that's where it kind of comes from. But it's an obsessional mind as well. So if you had a polar bear in your back garden, you'd be reminded of it constantly. So you'd keep checking. And it's a vigilant mind. So if the perception is that danger is all around, then it's wise to stay on red alert. And because the primitive brain is not an intellect, it can't innovate. Like I said, it's the same as a rat's. So it has to refer to previous patterns of behaviour. And if what we did yesterday ensured our survival, then we're encouraged to do it again. And that's how we get into like these really bad habits of like, oh, I stayed in bed yesterday and I'm alive. That kept me safe. So we're encouraged to do that kind of thing again. Okie doke. So how do we create this anxiety that causes us to move from that nice, sensible, intellectual part of the brain into the angry, anxious, or depressed part? So anxiety is caused by negative thinking. So it's not the events in our lives that necessarily cause the perception of crisis. No, it's our thought patterns around them. So every negative thought that we have is accumulated and stored, and we say it's stored into a stress bucket. Thankfully, we do have a method of emptying our bucket, and it's known as REM sleep, so rapid eye movement. So at night, we rerun the events of a day, and we change them from being an emotional memory into a narrative memory. And it's then a memory that we have control over. So you'll be familiar with how REM works. So think about like someone upsets you in the afternoon and you're really, really upset. You tell your partner about it and they just sigh, oh, forget about it, like you were in too much or whatever. But you really can't. So you go to bed, you're thinking about it, you're still angry, you're thinking about it, that really annoyed you. During your REM sleep that night, you'll rerun that event, either clear or metaphorically through dreaming. And you'll move it from that primitive part of the brain up into the intellectual part of the brain where you have control over it. So when you wake up in the morning, you might well have forgotten about that wretched person. You might not have, but you'll certainly be saying something like, how do I allow these people to upset me so much? And this is where the saying, sleep on it, comes from, because the emotion is taken out of those situations so much during your REM sleep. That's why we say sleep on it. And because your brain figures it all out in the night. So it can become a vicious cycle though. So the more you have in your bucket, the more you have disturbed sleep. And so then you've got even more to process, and therefore the more time you spend in that emotional primitive mind, the more negative you are, and it just goes around in a vicious cycle. So what solution-focused hypnotherapy does is get people focusing on the positive aspects of their life and to stop piling so much into their bucket. And when you do, you start sleeping better as well. So really out of breath now. Okie doke, I think I'm doing all right for time. Yeah, 2 minutes. So quickly, I'll just tell you about the physiology, about what happens in the brain when we suffer from anxiety disorders and depression. So early man and early woman were given quite definite rewards for carrying out certain evolutionary processes. So they got a reward when they went out and hunted and gathered, and they successfully supported themselves and their families. We're better as a tribe than we are as individuals. So they also got a reward when they interacted with others. And the reward they got has been proven by scientists, and it's a physical reward that helps you to feel motivated, and it was a coping mechanism. So it helped kind of a caveman cope with day-to-day activities, it helped them cope with physical fear, and it also made them braver, and it also helped them cope with physical pain. So we do know what that reward is now. Like I said, it has been scientifically proven, and it's a chemical response in the brain that produces various neurotransmitters, as you can see some of them there. And the neurotransmitter that we talk about most, simply as it's the most important, is serotonin. So when we produce a constant flow of serotonin, we're nice, happy, coping, brave little souls. So we need to operate within those positive parameters like early man. And when we do, like we obviously don't have to go out and hunt, but we do have to interact with people in a positive way. We do have to be active in a positive way, and we do have to think in a positive way. Because when we do, we produce those patterns of the brain that give us a constant flow of serotonin. And we refer to those in hypnotherapy as the 3 Ps. So positive actions, positive interactions, and positive thoughts. Easy peasy, eh? Okay, so we also use trance in hypnotherapy, which basically a state of mind that we go in and out of multiple times a day without even realizing it. So for example, if you've ever driven or walked somewhere and it's a route that you do all the time, you get there and you're just like, oh my God, I don't even remember that journey. You were in a trance. It's as simple as that. We go in and out of it all the time. And it's basically when those two minds come together They focus on the same thing. And when we're in that state, we have, my time's going off. We have access to the subconscious mind, which helps us enormously. And trance basically mimics REM sleep to help us empty out that bucket so we can approach life in a calm way. So you're in complete control at all times. And it's simply just a deep, relaxed state. So here are a few things, just to name a few. The list is literally endless. So any symptom that is triggered by stress or anxiety can be treated holistically through solution-focused hypnotherapy. And I just want to finish on this image here, because I think it's inherent in all of us to set unrealistic and often too challenging goals. So we want to be at the top of that ladder and we want to be there now. And we set ourselves up to fail. So solution-focused hypnotherapy, we break people's goals down and we make them achievable and we celebrate those small steps. And a phrase that I absolutely love every time I get overwhelmed with everything that I've got to do is, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Boom, boom, mic drop. Lovely. Sorry, I went over.
Sorry, I couldn't find my unmute button then. Thank you very much, Lou. Has anybody got any questions? Anybody got any questions? Oh, I think you just put yourself on mute.
I have actually, because you might have seen me getting sideways distracted a bit there, but that's because my daughter's with me and she suffers from anxiety and depression. So she was piggyback on listening to that. And one of the things she said, this is great, and it's so informative, but she said, how do you get the person that you can see obviously is struggling to recognize that in themselves? Because it's really hard to do, because that's the battle I had with her.
Yeah.
And then they think they're handling it themselves because they have a couple of good days when they have that positive vibe, and then it just comes back down again. So, you know, what can you recommend? Having seen that, because it's given me so much food for thought, honestly. It's blown my mind. I've screenshotted about 3 screens, you know. So
that's
I'm
good
so
to hear.
glad I came today for that. Yeah.
I think it's really difficult question to answer because everyone's different, isn't it? And it's only when somebody recognizes that there is a difference in themselves and they recognize that actually this isn't this like anxiety, depression, whatever that behavior is, it's not helping them. And it's only at that point when you go to try and find help. So it is really difficult to recognize. But I think because it's so, with hypnotherapy, I think everyone could benefit from it. Anyone that has any kind of unless you have absolutely no stress in your life, everyone can benefit because it just helps calm you. It just helps kind of calm that primitive mind and allow you to be the best version of yourself. So the way I talk about it, I just think everyone can benefit. It doesn't have to be that you're suffering from anxiety or depression. It can help everyone. It's lovely, but it is really tricky to get for people to recognize that they need that support.